So I came home from uni and I noticed there was no one in the house and everyone's like at least 30, 40 miles away. And, you know, from that I realized I can just walk around the entire house naked and make YouTube videos, with no interruptions. Um, you know, I also, take this advantage to make videos, wearing no clothes because as a male, I'm probably less likely to be vilified for it in general, you know? And it's not that cold. I mean, it is 5 degrees outside or something, but I'm not going to freeze to death. So here we are, I guess. Um, but yeah, getting to the idea of the video, the title, a lot of things I noticed, well, just from just seeing social situations play out and just watching people grow up and whatnot, and how they feel their roles in society, is that a lot of people seem to be able to, you know, or seem to only act upon the things that they see as acceptable, for example. So especially like around the secondary school age, there's this whole pressure to like be accepted or at least not stand out in some way, whether it be standing out in terms of being absolutely brilliant or absolutely horrible, like academically speaking, or you gotta have a fashion sense now, you gotta do all these things, you know, which can often lead to the suppression of the individuality we have. But overall, I'm just getting to the point that a lot of the time, people seem to be quite made up of the things that they've allowed themselves to continue doing, whether that be certain actions. So, like, I don't know, I don't know, I may see myself as a kind or horrible person, or someone might see myself as a kind or horrible person, because there's certain acts that no one has really challenged me when I perform them. So I know when I'm super charitable, no one's challenged me and said, no, no, you don't need to be. Or when I've been, quite cutthroat, or when I've been, I don't know, abusive, for example, no one has challenged me. And thus, at least in this scenario, in this social circle I operate in, I've been able to get away with these actions, which have then become habits, which then become part of my personality. That's the general gist of what I'm saying here. This can be, like I said, quite a positive and a negative thing, in the sense that, positively speaking, if you are able to liberate yourself from the things that often hold a lot of people back, the peer pressure, for example, like I mentioned, that suppresses the individual, especially at the school age, but throughout life. And if you're able to break free from that, you can be yourself and push to be the best version of yourself, rather than adhere to these ideals of a standard that everyone's supposedly supposed to reach. How much makeup should I wear? How close should I be in a YouTube video? How how should I light my cameras, for example? Do I need to speak in standard English, for example? These things. But also, of course, there's the negatives of, if often what is seen as toxic behavior isn't challenged, or certain things, whether it be something small like, I don't know, a racist joke, or, well, can be small but a reflection of bigger issues, or something a lot bigger like, I don't know, systematic issues, or just complete ignorance of other people's plight, like I mentioned in an earlier video, like the plight of the immigrant, for example. Obviously this can manifest in quite negative ways in the same way, um, and I think it relates to, in a way, what I would call like the social privileges one might have. Like the social privilege I have on the internet, that seems to still have a bit of the male gaze vibe, but nowhere near as much as traditional media in the past, is the fact that I can literally do this video like pretty much naked, and people up. I'd say if people were to comment on this video, there'd still be at least above 50% people commenting on the content of the video produced. Of course, it's a hypothesis of myself and based on the observations I've already made in the communities I'm a part of on the internet. But it seems if I was female, for example, it'd be less likely that that many people would actually comment on things other than just my appearance, for example. Um, yeah, and it relates back to that whole privilege thing, or the whole like idea of tradition, and how like your parents' tradition or the tradition that you've fostered amongst maybe your closest friend group becomes the things and becomes the parameters in which you operate in. You can choose to work in these parameters and risk social exclusion, or if you push the boundaries and do it with originality, you can actually, interestingly, create the avenue for other people, to do the same, to get away with more things, positive or negative. So to get away with more bigotry, you could say. So people say the Brexit vote and how it's linked to people feeling they can get away with more bigotry or more overt bigotry and abuse than, the beginning of 2016, for example. Or, if I play jazz and if I play these few chords and I play them at a different rhythm and I put some distortion on, then I can start this new genre, this new rise of a genre, because if I'm doing it and I can get away with it, then other people can get away with it. So in a weird way, it's like a person who is quite locked into their social environment will perform in certain ways, like their social influences. I speak standard English, normally at uni, because I have this theory that most people won't understand. However, once I meet a Londoner, I can take the risk and get away with using London slang, because I know even if they don't really speak it themselves, they will at least understand me, and that's the crux of it. So in the same, So how, like, both how society will shape us, but also how we kind of can shape society by pushing those boundaries, or how we help to solidify society by maintaining those boundaries, which are quite negotiated, it seems, amongst, you could say, every single sentient being in a given society. So I got this example from a page called Feminists United. I feel like whenever women complain about men, they speak about things that men have done to them, whereas on the inverse, it's what women haven't done for them. And in this way, I wrote a little comment, and I wanted to just go over it. I'll leave it up on the screen just so you can read it. But generally, the idea is that in our society, at least, it seems that women have the higher pressure to, in social situations, for example, they have the expectation of being, more social beings, for example, and all these things, and that might be based off certain things like, the slight biological advantage, or the slight biological tendency towards social situations, or at least the lack of these biological tendency away from them. Like the idea that autism, for example, was found more in men, for example. But seeing how these things manifest to the point and where we are, like in the modern day, where women carry the heavier burden in terms of social interactions, and thus, will suffer more in some ways because they have the weight of expectation upon them, which means they can only act within certain parameters in our society. So in general, I was just getting at a hypothesis I came up with, just looking at how from the age of young childhood, at the very least, once you start getting involved in social circles, whether it just be your family or nursery or whatever, the things that you're allowed to do when you're recklessly exploring, in the terrible twos phase, for example, will be the beginning of how your personality is arguably shaped, and also the way you relate to the world. So in the manner in which you relate to the world will also mean that when you either consciously or subconsciously kind of negotiate the socially accepted things, or the parameters in which one can activate. So not everyone has to be the same, but within these parameters. So you can be a bit edgy, but there's a certain point where you're not allowed to, or you can be, I don't know, one era you can be kind of misogynistic, but you can't be extreme misogynistic, and they'll believe women should vote, for example. There's like a certain threshold in which, in mainstream society, in 2016, you won't be able to really get away with. You know, of course, you could bring up examples like Donald Trump, but then that shows that that society has changed, because if there's things people, which also brings a quite big point, because if there's things people don't feel they can really get away with in the mainstream, out in the open, overtly, they'll still feel that if they themselves believe and allow themselves to get away with it, they'll still hold on to these traits, whether it be bigotry, whether it be some form of ignorance or anything, for example. Like, I think of it, a good example would be like the table tennis player, right? He has a coach that tells him he needs to work on his forehand, but he knows his backhand is really strong. So he could work on his forehand, and he probably should work on his forehand, but he can choose the alternate route. And if he says, if I just work on my backhand and make it so strong that, I win 9 points off it, it doesn't matter, because I'll just stay in my bubble and, be able to get away with not having a weak forehand. And that's okay for me. That's what I mean. It's not just what society has allowed you to get away with. At the end of the day, it's what you allow yourself to get away with. And these things are, influenced, like these parameters are influenced by society, but you, at the end of the day, will set the parameters for your own personality.